we're here to talk about an additional almost $30 million in federal funding going to the Port of Coos Bay for their intermodal project. After last week, just a week ago, they got $25 million. So now we're seeing a total of $55 million in federal funding going to this project. What is your reaction to that?
Well, first of all, we've got more than 50 million reasons on the South Coast to be happy. And last week was, in effect, Infrastructure Day. Now it's Infrastructure Week. And what's important for folks to know is last week we were focused mostly on environmental design. Now we're talking about issues relating to upgrades of the Coos Bay rail line. And that's especially important because it's critically essential to transport cargo to and from the terminal. It's also critically important because the West Coast has a very significant a shortage of shipping capacity. This is going to enhance that, so it'll be good for Coos Bay. It'll also be good for businesses throughout the West.
Yeah, when I was talking to, I think his name is Matt Friesman, the Director of External Affairs at Port of Coos Bay, he was kind of explaining how the intermodal project is kind of this three-pronged project of having the building of the terminal alongside the channel modification and then upgrading the railroad system. So the first $25 million kind of seem to expand over all three channels of this project, whereas now this over $29 million is really focusing on that railway system. And I want to hear from you pretty much, why is really focusing on that railway system a really key important part of this project?
The reason the rail aspect of this is so important is this would really set the bar in America for modern, environmental friendly ship-to-rail container operations. That makes it a winner for the economy, but also a huge winner for the environment, because what it will do is get a lot of the polluting vehicles off the highways.
And when I was talking to Mr. Friesman last week, he was saying, they're going to need more federal funding at some point. They weren't probably expecting a week later to get this federal funding. How did you think that quick of a turnaround was going to happen?
I believe the congressional delegation has been making the case. We've done it systematically. We've had so many sessions with the relevant agencies. And I think in particular, people saw that with our port having access to a Class 1 railroad, we're in a very good position for quick movement of cargo. And that's a big plus because, we are all about trade in our part of the world. It's about 1/4 of the jobs in Oregon. The trade jobs often pay better than do the non-trade jobs. So what I'm all about with Coos Bay is this is going to be great for exporters. We can grow things in Oregon. We can make things in Oregon. We can add value to them in Oregon. And the world loves buying Oregon. And this is going to be better for people who want to do that.
Yeah, on that note, I think you would agree with something that Congresswoman Val Hoyle said recently to Pete Buttigieg about the fact that we shouldn't have to rely on Canadian ports to bring in our exports into the States, because she was talking a lot about how those ports right now are so much faster and bigger that's where they're going into, or going into Georgia. But now we're getting ports that are going to be in Oregon that are going to better help spread it across the nation without having to go into external nations for that help.
And we have an obvious advantage in terms of the Pacific Rim. I mean, we're so well positioned. Everybody gives speeches about how they're going to outcompete China. This gives us a big chance to do that.
Yeah, so speaking on pitching this idea over and over again and finally getting some of that federal funding going this way, January of last year, a $1.25 billion grant was denied for the project. Do you feel that was maybe asking for too much at one time, or it needed to be spread out across more grants over more time?
What I can tell you is right after that took place, in fact, essentially as part of their announcement, we met the congressional delegation, Val Hoyle, Senator Merkley, and myself. We had a discussion with the president personally about it. And in fact, the president said that he would assign somebody specifically in the administration to help us. He said that Coos Bay reminded him of Scranton, Pennsylvania, where he came up, a really working class town where they were concerned about where the good jobs were going to come from. And we dug deep into working with the administration. That's why the first payment was so important, because that was about environmental design. As you know from following the story, there's been concern about environmental issues. We made it clear we're not going to cut any corners on the environment. The first stage focused on environmental design. Now we're focused on the Coos Bay rail line. And the way I would sum it up is the reason that we're doing well with these two installments is you've got a small town, Coos Bay, showing big grit, and the administration's paying attention to it.
Yeah, Mr. Matt Friesman was also saying how the Port of Coos Bay kind of presents opportunities that really other ports on the West Coast really just don't provide. Whereas ports in Portland, they're surrounded by a big city where there's already all this land taken over. Whereas Coos Bay, like you said, is small, is rural, and has so much potential with that land and to bring in so many more jobs as well. Can you talk on that?
8,000 jobs is the number that we think is the potential. And this is, Lauren, a big economic multiplier, because the jobs will start with construction. As chairman of the Senate Finance Committee, I'm already looking into the housing issues. I've got two pieces of legislation that are relevant, something called LIHTC, the low-income housing tax credit I've authored. And then we have another piece of legislation called MITEC, middle-income housing tax credits. Both of those tax credit programs would be ideal for the South Coast.
Yeah. One of my last questions that I have for you. So this project is taking an area of Oregon, Southern Oregon specifically, that is so regularly overlooked, regularly seen as just rural. This is small. This is a small area. We don't need to pay that much attention to it by a lot of people outside of Oregon. Do you feel that this project, when completed, is really going to give Southern Oregon the recognition it deserves, alongside with making it bigger in the global economy?
The South Coast is going to get a lot of credit, particularly for these new approaches involving shipment, ship-to-rail container operations. Lauren, these are state-of-the-art kind of ideas. They give you a chance to win economically, be good for the environment, and yes, Coos Bay is going to get national recognition for its ship-to-rail container operations that are going to be good for the environment. It also is part of an effort I've made over the years, because Coos Bay has had an awful lot of economic hurt since the timber policies changed, and all kinds of people would come through, Coos Bay with pretty grandiose ideas for economic development, and they'd have their expensive suits and their shirts with the French cuffs on them, and I'd say, wow, this doesn't exactly look like the South Coast that I know. And we've just stayed at it. The community has stayed at it, and I think this project is the North Star for the South Coast.
Lastly, Senator, we saw 25 million last week. We saw nearly 30 million this week. What's for the future of Port of Coos Bay in your idea?
Well, I think we're going to keep building on it. We've got other big issues to go. We know that there are very substantial questions with respect to permitting that we've got to deal with. But if you had told people we would have made all this progress in about a week's time, that's why I call it Infrastructure Week. People were excited about Infrastructure Day. Now we got the full Infrastructure Week with these two grants totaling about $55 million. We're off to the races, and it also gives us enough credit in terms of the government supporting these two efforts to go to the private sector and say, we want your involvement because we're on our way.
Okay, Senator, that's all the questions I have for you. This is kind of my open floor moment for you to say anything that I haven't specifically asked you that you think it's important for me to know.
I think we've covered a lot of ground. It's very exciting, and I appreciate your focus on the details.